It does take time. I'm glad you called that out. And one of the places we struggle when we kind of move into leadership roles or move up in leadership roles is that we don't really realize our shadow just got a little bit bigger, and the feedback we're getting from our direct reports and people that used to be our friends and our happy hour buddies has now gone through a filter before it gets to us, and it's not so useful. Perhaps I could give an example from someone that I look up to for maybe not leadership lessons, but just career aspirations. I'm not a musician, but I sure would like to be one. Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters. He's pretty well known. He wrote this book. He's got this like really fascinating story that when he was starting Foo Fighters post Nirvana, he had a drummer named William Goldsmith, not to be confused with the Marshall Goldsmith we talked about earlier on the podcast. But he had this drummer that was really good, was also successful, and Grohl was sort of a perfectionist. So Grohl was now the front man of Foo Fighters, singing, playing the guitar, but he's a drummer by trade. Anyway, he wasn't completely satisfied by how the tracks in the studio were going out. He knew he needed a drummer for the stage shows and this sort of thing. He got an opportunity that he probably should have passed up. His studio guys called him back and said, "Hey, we've got some more time here. We'd like to record some other tracks." And Grohl just said, "Okay, I'll lay down all the tracks by myself, including the drums." And while he was there, he went and re-recorded some existing tracks, and he did the drums on them. And then sort of probably sensing that he had done something wrong, he calls William Goldsmith and kind of tells him what he did. He's like, "It's for the better of the band. Don't worry about it, blah, 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 blah." I'm projecting my own beliefs on how this conversation went. And Goldsmith is pissed. He said, he's like, "Screw this. I'm not doing it." And he quits the band. And that's not sustainable. You can't be a rock band and go on tour if you don't have a drummer that's any good and is willing to play with you. So fast forward, they get this guy now, the late Taylor Hawkins, to play drums. Coincidentally, before they record, Hawkins has an encounter with somebody. I forget who, someone really famous, maybe Axl Rose, who says, "What's it like playing drums for the greatest drummer of the 1990s or something like this?" And this just puts Hawkins into imposter syndrome mode, despite his being like a really accomplished musician at the time. And he screws up on a drum track or something in the studio, and Grohl says, and so Hawkins actually says, "I can't do this, man. Can Dave just go back and lay down the drum track after I'm done? Like, I don't care." Grohl, whether it was intentional or not, had apparently learned something from his prior experience and says, "I cannot be the perfectionist. I cannot be this person that screws up everybody else's willingness to take ownership and be vulnerable in these situations." And he basically makes Hawkins play the drums. And only later does Grohl put it together that this was like sort of a growth moment and sort of a reflecting moment. And I think we go through those as leaders too. Like a lot of times we have to realize like our perfectionism, our desire to our strengths, all of these things that got us here are no longer sufficient if we're trying to do something like create one of the biggest rock and roll bands or one of the biggest startups or one of the best value-adding organizations in the world.